From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debbie Silber, and today's guest is Michelle Farris. Michelle is a licensed psychotherapist and anger management specialist in San Jose, California. She's been featured in several publications, including Psych Central, The Daily Positive, Your Tango, Bustle, and others. She teaches people how to create healthy relationships with simple tools that improve self-esteem and heal codependency. She's also written 3 ebooks and online courses to support growth and learning. Her guilty pleasure is watching Netflix and a venti latte from Starbucks. This episode is for you if you're not comfortable with anger, not sure how to express it, if you're taking care of everyone else at your own expense, and so much more. I'm speaking with Michelle Farris today, and we're talking about healthy anger and codependence recovery. You're going to love this episode. Here's Michelle. Okay, everybody, we're talking with Michelle Farris today. You're going to love this topic. We're talking about the value of healthy anger, self-care, and relationships in codependency recovery. I said healthy anger. We're going to be talking about that because I know so many people they're not sure, they're uncomfortable with their anger, they're not sure how to express it. So I love this topic. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm so glad to be here. I love your show.
Thanks so much. Let's start off with talking about codependency. Can you tell us, let's talk about that. What is it? How do we know if that's what we're working with?
So, preface by saying there's a million different definitions. As we know, there's so many books and stuff on this topic. But for me, it's a relationship pattern where we're basically focusing on others at our own expense. So it's not just the person who gives, it's the person who gives till it hurts. So they can't stop. So a lot of times people are like, well, am I codependent? Well, if your behavior is hurting you and your relationships, then that's probably a sign that you're doing too much or you're giving too much and you're in the realm of codependency.
I would love to. Can you come up with a few examples just so we could see what it would look like in a practical example of some of your patients or clients who were codependent, and this is what it looked like. So just so my listeners and viewers could be like, oh my gosh, that's me, or not.
So this is the person who can't say no. So when they're asked at church, can you do something? They always say yes, and yet their resentment is leaking out. Most likely, because when you say yes continually over and over again, and you never say no to protect your time, then of course you're going to be upset. Of course it's going to take its toll. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to feel anxious. Another example might be in a relationship where you are much more focused on pleasing the other person than saying what you need. So the whole goal becomes, I don't want my partner mad at me. So I'm going to say yes, I'm going to please, I'm going to negate myself so that they don't get mad at me.
And that feeling has to go somewhere. I mean, if we're just busy, taking care of someone else's needs and our needs aren't met, that's where the resentment builds, right? And then it has this cascading effect. It can't help but affect us physically and mentally and emotionally and things like that. So what do we do? So let's say we realize, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm doing. And what do I do about it?
So the first step is acknowledging it. Like, oh my gosh, I am saying yes when I mean no. Because even if you're not ready to change that behavior yet, even just acknowledging it is going to give you some relief, because honestly, part of codependency recovery is being honest with yourself and admit that, you know what, I don't want to say yes to my church every week. I want to be able to go to church and maybe not do a task and just enjoy the service, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But even if you're not ready to, because some codependent people will say, oh, I can't say no. Great, just acknowledge it to yourself, because eventually that voice is going to get louder and you're going to finally at one point say, you know what, I'm ready and I'm going to say no. And then you realize people aren't really, there's not a big reaction.
You know, what I love about that is the idea of acknowledging it to ourselves. That
Yeah.
could be a huge first step because
Right.
so many of us may not even realize that we're doing it. But when we call ourselves on
Hmm.
ourselves, at
Yeah.
least then it's almost like you can't unring the bell. You've heard it, you know it's
Exactly.
happening, and now you're choosing to do it anyway. And the conflict, I can see the conflict that
Yeah.
would go on, that inner battle. At some point, it's going to get harder and harder to
Right.
keep just saying yes when now we are very clear that that's what we're doing. We're saying it,
Yeah.
saying yes at our own expense. So acknowledging to ourselves first. I think that's great. Okay, so then we've said it to ourselves. We see it. We're getting really resentful now because now we
Uh-huh.
know clearly what we're doing.
Right.
What would be maybe a way to, how do we, because it's really true. That person just wants to know that task is taken care of. They don't,
Right.
it's almost like they don't care who's doing it.
Right.
So what, is there something that we should say? Is there a next step? What do you recommend?
So I always say start with the people you feel safest with. Don't start with your mother. Don't start with people who are really, intimidating for you. But start with a baby no, and you might even have to practice on a friend and say, hey, can I just role play this with you because I'm really afraid of their reaction. But that actually leads me to another point is sometimes when we don't want to set a boundary or do a new behavior, we have a lot of fear around it. And the fear is that, I'm sure you've probably heard this phrase in 12-step programs, false evidence appearing real.
Mhm.
And it's like we make up stuff. If I say no, they're going to be mad at me. If I decline, they're not going to get it done and they're going to be, swarmed. They're going to be overwhelmed. When really, when we say no, I mean, when I started saying no, I was so scared. And I realized that the other person was like, oh, fine, on to the next thing. And I had sweated for a month.
Right. And it's so interesting you saying that because I remember back in the day when I was just trying to be super mom. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's just one of those things, the
Sure.
4 kids and the 6 dogs and the
Yeah.
business. And I was doing it all. And I crashed and burned, got so sick. But anyway, I did. I had a really hard time saying no. And then it hit me once where I remember thinking to myself, think about it. How much time have I spent agonizing
Right.
over this?
Right.
But when I say no, it may be, yes, it may be like a minute of
Hmm.
discomfort when you're actually saying that. But look
Right.
what you've secured. It lasts so much more. So even just from a time
Yeah.
standpoint, here it was like you said, look,
Yeah.
all this time agonizing over it. And then you say it, which is just a fraction, right? It's such a tiny little
Right.
amount of time. And look what you get back. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So just getting back your time and I guess your strength, just the ability to just have some boundaries in place. So
Yeah.
let's talk about anger and healthy anger and what's
Mm-hmm.
that all about?
So I think most of us probably don't see anger as healthy, especially if you've grown up in dysfunctional families where you've had a rager, you've had somebody abusive. I know a lot of people make decisions like, I'm never going to have my anger, thank you very much,
Mhm.
because of the example they've seen. I know that's what I did. That's why I became a people pleaser, because I thought I will never, ever do that. However, that makes us feel like we don't, I mean, when you don't have access to your feelings, you're not being honest. And the codependent person prides themselves on being honest, right? Because they're a rule follower, they're super giving, and they contribute. But if I'm lying about how I really feel, I'm not going to be known in my relationships. And I had to get to the point, and I think that's why embracing our anger and codependency recovery is so key, because it's that point where you finally say, you know what, ouch, this hurts, and I actually need to say something, versus, no, I'm going to suck it up, I'm going to be a people pleaser, because you know what, it's safer that way, nobody's going to be mad.
So I really want to dive into this a little bit because
Yeah.
that's something that I think is going to help so many people. Let's just say something happens.
Hmm.
You would be angry if you allowed it, but
Right.
whatever you said to yourself, this isn't safe, I shouldn't do this, I can't do this,
Yeah.
I have to just get rid of this anger. Did you
Yeah.
know at the time that's what you were doing, that it was anger and you were trying to find a different option?
No, I thought it was resentment, because resentment was safer. I would never have I would never have labeled it anger until I sat on it long enough and I realized, okay, now I'm upset. Uh, but I had to get to that point where it was like, okay, I had to go back and acknowledge it myself. Wow, I'm actually angry. It's not resentment. Because even that, I think, for the codependent is huge because they have so many misconceptions about if I'm angry, I'm bad, I'm mean, I'm X,
Well,
versus what if it's normal?
right. But let's talk about the difference. What's the difference
Yeah.
between anger and resentment?
So resentment is more when you're stuffing your anger and it leaks out into, I resent you, so I'm not going to say something specifically to you. I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to swallow all of those feelings. And then they leak out in either passive aggressive comments, silent treatment, guilt trips, very indirect ways that people don't realize. And they're people hold on to it for years. So this is the person that might say, yeah, you know what, that person hurt me 5 years ago and I remember every detail.
That's the
So you're
poison right there.
that's right, you're
Yep.
holding on to it, versus anger is, wow, I'm really mad and I need to do something with this anger because it is hurting me and or it's hurting the relationship.
Okay, so now because everybody listening, watching this show, or most, they are struggling to heal from a betrayal of a family member, partner, friend, coworker, self.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the difference in what it would look like,
Hmm.
resentment and anger with, let's say they're trying to heal from a betrayal. They're trying to either heal or move on, heal and rebuild with that person,
Yeah.
whatever the situation is. And the resentment would look like what, and the anger would look like what?
So the resentment is more, to me, an internal process where you're writing. I actually have a resentment journal that I created because you have to find, okay, how is it hurting you? You have to vent all of what you resent, because usually when we have a resentment, there's a huge story attached, and we need to get that story completely out on paper, because that's how you're going to solve it. Because when we're holding something in for, let's just say, 5 years, right, there's probably a lot attached to that.
Mhm.
It's not just one thing somebody did. Now we have a huge story. And if you can get to your part in that resentment, that's what typically changes it. Whether it's something you did before or after or during or in reaction to, those are the things that are going to shift. Because if I can see my part, I'm not going to be as resentful.
Mhm.
Whereas with anger, and I'll go back to your question about healthy anger too, is if I'm angry, I'm going to have to say, hey, I'm upset, I'm angry, and I have to name the specific behavior that somebody did or said that hurt me. Now, where most people get lost is they'll say something like, I'm mad because you never support me. You're never there for me. Well, what does that mean? The other person's going to be like, what are you talking about? I'm there for you every day. But if you say, I'm really mad that when I talked to you last night, you were on your phone the whole time, then the other person's going to be like, oh, well, I was on my phone the whole time.
So let's take that scenario there, and let's just imagine this person
Hmm.
asked the other person, they were very clear, I'm angry because you were on your phone.
Yeah.
And then the next night and the next night and the next night, it's the same thing. They're still on
Yeah.
their phone. And
Yeah.
does anger then turn into resentment?
Sure. If you have a partner that's not responding, Uh, but that might be, so if you have a repeat scenario like that, then you might bring that up as, you know what, here's what I notice. I notice that when I try to talk to you at night, you're typically on your phone. I wouldn't say always or never, because those are buzzwords that people are going to
Mhm.
react to because they're going to
Right.
get defensive. And if you can have a conversation and say, hey, can we talk about this? Because you may not know, that may be a really bad time to talk to your partner. They may be zoned at that point. They may need that veg time to just be on their phone. Maybe they'll come back to you and say, you know what? Nights aren't good for me, but how about afternoons? So you get to negotiate, okay, what does that look like? You don't give up your need because you're mad. You actually bring it up and say, hey, can we talk about this? But you own that, this hurts, or this really bothers me,
Mm.
you
So
know?
so let's use that because it's just a perfect example. So let's use that
Hmm.
same example now and talk
Yeah.
about how would somebody respond with healthy anger versus
Uh-huh.
unhealthy anger.
to the person
To the
who
person
isn't.
whose face is
Yeah,
in the phone when they need to speak. Oh, I'm using this example
yeah,
because I'm sure so many
yeah.
people can relate to this.
Yeah. Well, I would say I'm really frustrated when you continue to be on your phone and I want to talk to you. I really would like some time together, but I'm naming it. I'm not being general, and I'm not creating a judgment, because I could say something very different. I could say, "You're an ass for always being on the phone.
Hmm,
You
hmm.
never you're never there for me." So if I go down that road, of course they're going to get defensive, because they're going to go, "I'm a nice guy," or "I'm a nice gal. What are you talking about? I'm
Hmm.
there for you. I'm sitting right next to you." Right? They're going to have their own comeback, versus if you stick with the facts and the feeling, and it isn't about judgment, it's going to go down better. That's why you can't jump everything in the kitchen sink in this. You can't say you always or you never, because the other person's not going to deal with that. They're going
Okay.
to get defensive.
So I think a big part of this is not assuming that the person is doing that because they don't care, because,
Mhm.
we're not important, we don't
Right,
matter, all of these things that we can lump in. And that's where it could be.
right.
Now there's anger and there's hurt on top of it. So I could see that's just a big, ugly storm
Yeah,
we're creating right there. Okay. So
yeah.
the healthy anger would be to just name it, be very specific, and no judgment to it.
Mhm.
Am I getting that right?
No, and you still can be mad. You can
Hmm.
still say, "I'm really mad at this. This really hurts me. This has happened before." That's different than saying, "You're always doing this," or "You're making me mad." Because again, that "you" is going to set you up for a really toxic conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So the resentment, because that's something that so many people in my community struggle with, because
Hmm.
they look at their relationship like, I was a good partner. I didn't do any. I was abiding by the
Hmm.
rules, the spoken or unspoken rules of this relationship. Let's take a marriage, for example. And
Yeah.
betrayal, could be a coworker, a friend, anything. But we're just
Right.
taking, let's say, a marriage. And then let's say they're trying to make sense and make meaning out of this, but the
Hmm.
resentment, maybe because of the injustice of it, maybe because of just how traumatic it was to their heart.
Hmm.
How do you manage that resentment? What do you do to let
Well,
that go?
the first couple things I would wonder is, what's your self care like? What's your support system like? Because if you're trying to deal with a resentment in isolation, that's going to be really tough. Um, but and have you told that story? And have you challenged that story? Like, because when I get a resentment, I know some of the story isn't true. And I have to be willing to see that part. Like, okay, you know what? I'm kind of embellishing a little bit here because I'm hurt. And that's normal. We all do that. We all want our stories to be justified, especially if you come from a family of hurt and betrayal. Then, of course, it's going to mean a lot more as an adult to make sure your hurt is justified. But we have to be willing to kind of dissect the story and see, okay, what is our part? So even in a marriage, that's like, give your example where you're following the rules, you're being respectful, you're doing all this stuff. Well, are you taking care of you? Are you setting boundaries? What else could be contributing to your resentment that you could look at? Like, maybe all your emotional eggs are in their basket and you're expecting them to be different. Well, that's a setup for resentment, right?
Mm. And
Versus us saying, "Hey, I got to get my needs met outside my relationship, not just in my relationship."
Yeah, and it's so interesting because there is such a link between
Hmm.
betrayal and self-betrayal. And I think
Yes.
we get so angry at ourselves,
Yeah.
that we're not uh standing strong or saying what our boundaries are or really
Right.
sticking to, and then we get angry at
Right.
ourselves. So yes, of course we're angry at whoever did this to us, but we're also so angry at just that it could
Yeah.
be just that role that we had in it. So I love that, the emotional eggs. Do we have all of our emotional eggs in their basket? That's interesting. Okay. So the resentment is a lot to move through. Is it the kind of thing where you just take it on? You're like, okay, that's it. This emotion, this experience is
Uh-huh.
poisoning me.
Yeah.
There's that saying, what is it? It's when you drink poison and you hope the other
Poison.
person dies,
Yep.
right? That's what, to me, isn't that what resentment is? I mean, I think
Oh,
that's,
yeah. But the other thing we have to remember is recovery is messy. Recovery is not a process where, okay, you go in, you do work for several months or even several years and then feel like everything's perfect. You're going to struggle on occasion, and that's part of recovery. And I think sometimes people beat themselves up like, oh, I shouldn't still have this resentment. Well, you know what? You do. And it's okay. It's part of the process. And I guess that's what I really want to give people is permission to, do this recovery imperfectly because nobody does it perfectly. Even therapists, we're not, we don't have the market on, oh, now we're perfect. We have everything together. No, we still struggle. And those are the teachers I think I really want to learn from myself because they're willing to do the work.
I love that you brought that up because it's so true. If someone is seeming too perfect, that is so not real. I
I
don't
know.
trust that. I just don't
Right.
trust it. And you're right. Real when it comes to transformation with something like betrayal. I mean, the old is,
Yeah.
it crashes and burns.
Right.
And to rebuild isn't it's not smooth, it's not graceful.
Nope.
And I think that's
Right.
why a lot of people avoid it. And that's when they
Yeah.
use all of those avoidance
Right.
tactics because to dive into this stuff is some serious work. So yeah,
Right. Or
God,
they feel like they're doing it wrong. Like, oh, somebody else is healing faster than I am. Look at all the kudos they're getting. Look at all the progress they're making. But it's so unfair for us to compare ourselves with other people because we don't know their story,
right.
you know?
So is it possible, let's say we realize, oh my gosh, I am codependent. Is it
Yeah.
possible to realize that maybe we've been codependent? Can we have a healthy relationship that way?
We totally can. We just have to try to create a balance between what we're giving and what we're receiving because the codependent doesn't want to receive. The power position is to give because when I give, I have that hero's high because I
Hmm.
feel really needed and I feel really good. But then I crash into resentment because at some point I'm going to need something. And if I don't ask for it or I expect them to know, it's going to be a mess. But yeah, I mean, I think thank God we're living in a time with all these resources that you can create a healthy relationship because there's so much more material in how to do that.
Hmm.
There's Al-Anon, there's Coda, there's workbooks, there's classes, there's all these resources that people can use. But I think for me, the healthy relationship for the codependent starts with, how do I identify what's unhealthy? Where are our relationships codependent, unhealthy, imbalanced, because that's going to be the starting point to start repairing it.
And you talked about the importance of self-care
Mhm.
a while back, and it's so common to feel guilty. It's like if everybody
Mm,
else is taken care of
right.
and everybody else's needs are met, if there's any time left, I'll take a look and see, oh, yeah, I'm here too. What do I need? How do we
Right.
stop feeling guilty about that?
I think we need to kind of look at where that came from. Like, what are your beliefs around self care? Because if it's, oh, it's selfish, well, I will bet that you don't judge your best friend for taking care of themselves. You would encourage your best friend to take care of yourselves. And I think that's what we have to remember is the people who love us want us to take care of ourselves because they know that we're going to be easier to be in relationship with, we're going to be happier. And sometimes using that external motivation of, your family really wants this for you can help the codependent because they're like, oh, they're not going to be mad. No, most likely they're not. They want you to be less overwhelmed.
And it's so true. And I always, with someone who's not taking care of themselves, if they have kids, let's say, I'll just say, okay, do
Yeah,
you have? What would you say? What would you say to your child?
right.
And the
Exactly.
answer comes out in 2 seconds.
Yep.
It's so easy and it's so clear. And then
Right.
they realize, oh my gosh, I'm the biggest role model. And if they're watching me and I'm
Yeah.
not doing exactly what I would suggest for them, well, then I'm just sending a scary message there. So
Right.
what does everybody need to know as we wrap up?
That you can totally heal from codependency and don't be afraid of the anger and resentment because I guarantee that is going to deepen your healing because there's a reason why you feel resentment or there's a reason you feel angry. It's not like, oh, you're bad or wrong or you shouldn't feel that way. There's a reason. And if you can get to that reason, you're going to get to the gift because there's going to be some change in either yourself or your relationships based on what that feeling is.
And you know what that's like? I talk about it sometimes, the hero's journey, right? Where
Yeah.
here we are just, la, 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 skating along. And then something happens. And in
Yep.
our case, with everybody here, it's a betrayal. And then that there starts the climb and the opportunity
Right.
to do all we need to do, go through those challenges and all that we have to get to the prize, which in this
Yeah.
case could just be feeling better, knowing the
Yeah.
emotions that we have, not burying them, and
Right.
feeling okay that we do experience anger and how to manage through it, carefully and skillfully. So
Hmm.
where do we go to learn more about you?
So my website is counselingandrecovery.com, and I have a lot of resources there. I have a new codependency workbook that I just put out that's pretty fun. It's very extensive. So if people want a step-by-step process, that's what I wish I had when I started, because I went to Al-Anon, and the 12 steps are great, but it didn't talk about self-care. It didn't talk about how do you set a boundary when you're scared to death. And that's the stuff for me that I love to create.
That's going to be so helpful. There are so many people in my community, and we have just discussions around this exact topic. So
Yeah.
I can really see how needed this work is, and I'm so glad you're doing it. So, Michelle,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I know you help so many people with what you share with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you do too.
I learned so much during that episode, and I hope you did too. Like, vent what you resent, and so much more. Stay in touch with Michelle by going to counselingrecovery.com, and we'll have all of her information in the show notes at thepbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. The first step is being honest with yourself and acknowledging how you feel. Then start small by saying no or standing up to someone you feel safe with. When you're expressing your healthy anger, be sure to avoid words like always and never. Then name what's upsetting you and what you're feeling. Don't let the anger turn into resentment. That's poison for your body, mind, and your relationships. All of that takes a toll, so be sure to take the post-betrayal syndrome quiz, which you can find at thepbtinstitute.com/quiz. And of course, if you haven't already, check out the PBT Institute membership community. Everything is in there that you'd ever need to become your physical, mental, and emotional best. Community, support, certified coaches, and practitioners that you can schedule time with, daily classes on all kinds of interesting topics, curated experts teaching advanced strategies in the areas of health, mindset, spirituality, personal development. Imagine the most friendly, welcoming, and supportive place to become your best, and it's all online. Nothing like this exists, and I am so excited to welcome you. Go to thepbtinstitute.com/join to learn more. Like the show? Please subscribe, rate, and review. And of course, if you know of someone struggling to heal from a betrayal, be sure to tell them about the show too. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to be with you next time, and here's to your breakthrough.